G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and that you are having a fantastic Sunday and that the Sunday blues haven't got you too bad. I know Monday can be rough, but at least you're not starting chemotherapy tomorrow. I'm stepping into my third round of chemo tomorrow. The blood work has come back positive and I am ready to start, but I will have a video tomorrow because I am going to push the chemotherapy later in the day. But this week may be a little bit up and down for myself, but this month coming after this round, I do have an MRI and I will receive results and we will see if it is doing anything. Just a warning, last time I did 12 months of chemotherapy, we saw very, very little change in the about 2 millimeter mark. But legends, you don't want to hear about me. You want to hear about what is happening. And as always, I have a lot to go over. Now, round of applause, Syriac Maps is back. So, of course, we have a lot of updates with Syriac Maps. We've also got updates on the Deep State map. And, of course, we will be comparing the two, seeing where they're similar, seeing where they're different, and we will be looking at some geolocated footage as well. We'll look in my miscellaneous folder at some new weapon systems entering the battlefield. I want to talk about Ukrainian elections and how the US has said this will have to come directly after any negotiations or ceasefire. And I just want to break down some myths around can or can't Ukraine hold elections under martial law as per the Constitution. And then I actually want to extend on something yesterday because I wasn't really happy with it. I want to extend on the natural resources, and depending on what land remains occupied, gets liberated, who's in control of it, what does this mean both economically and strategically as well with resources there? Because it's more than just money. Okay, so of course we have a lot to go over. So look, let's start at my miscellaneous folder. Now, one thing I have been saying is the success that Russia has been having with fiber optic controlled drones, Ukraine needs to get that into play as soon as possible. Now, this footage has come out. Now, this is showing a Ukrainian bomber drone, the Baba Yaga, a significantly larger multiple rotor drone that can drop munitions. And in this video here, I do not have this translated, but this gentleman here is showing that this off the spool, I can't really move my mouse, but the spool on the bottom right of the drone here being now fiber optically controlled. As far as range, I do not know. Typically, we see these operating at about 10 kilometers. There's been claims of some upwards of 20 or 30 kilometers too, showing the strength of the cable. And this has been a very impressive change and upgrade to FPV and now like these larger bomber drones for that fiber optic control as well. And you can see the success that these are having. So we'll wait to see if these can begin production en masse, because remember, at the end of the day, you need lots of it. That just having then numerical advantage on the battlefield means a hell of a lot of advantage, not just tech, if you can't back it up again and again. We've seen that with, say, artillery. So let's have a look at some claims around a new Iskander missile. So I've seen a lot of media sharing bits and pieces like this, but more fringe media. Russia set to begin mass production of the Iskander 1000. The 1000, of course, referring to 1,000 kilometers, about 600 miles of range. That Russia appears to be on the brink of starting serial production, so mass production, of a new version of its well-known Iskander M tactical ballistic missile system. Don't confuse this with the Iskander K, more of a low-level cruise missile system, but a newer Iskander M, reaching up to the 1,000 kilometers. Now, what I will say is over the past 12 to 18 months, we have seen a significant, rapid increase in Russia's kill chain, especially for Iskanders, from seeing the target to getting an Iskander on that target. And we have spoken about there's a lot of changes here, both in industrial capacity, actually producing Iskanders. We spoke potential of some upgrades around the potential for these to then be actually laser guided to get around some jamming. But I believe the biggest effect we've seen on this is actually the adaptability of command, that we've seen these missile units come under artillery and therefore under the artilleryman's drones and policy, and that kill chain speed up as well. It's just another tool in the toolbox. And we've seen the effect of these increase, in my opinion, probably 3 to 5 times what we saw before this. Now, this same article says that the new Iskander M will deploy from the same transporter erector launcher platforms, or the TEL, as its siblings. The Iskander 1000 does not require a complete overhaul of existing infrastructure. This allows for quick integration into Russia's missile brigades, enhancing their operational flexibility. So this should just fit straight into the same launch platform, same vehicle. It's just an increased rocket. It has increases in its targeting ability, and it's a solid rocket fuel booster as well. But all in all, will be the same. That interoperability, that is very, very important regarding speed to actually employ it due to retraining of individuals. But there has been a lot of talk that this is just propaganda. We've seen Ukrainian papers share things like this: propaganda move to spread fear. Ukraine dismisses Russia's new Iskander 1000. Several military specialized outlets recently reported that Russia is preparing to mass produce a new version of its Iskander M, which could have a range of 1,000 kilometers, twice the reach of the current version. Now, the current one is around 400-ish. The publication, citing unnamed sources, state that the missile had been informally called the Iskander 1000 and that its development was first mentioned in May 2024 when Russia celebrated the 78th anniversary of the Kapustin Yar missile test range. So they are saying that this is not real, that this is just propaganda. Ukraine has dismissed these reports as disinformation. From Andriy Kovalenko, the head of Ukraine's Center for Countering Disinformation, refuted the claims and accused Russia of using the English language publication to spread propaganda, saying the English language outlet, which wrote a fake story about Russia's ability to produce 25 Otoshnik missiles a month, now writes lies about Russia's development of a new Iskander 1000. So saying that this is a lie, this is being used for propaganda. According to him, the goal is to push the narrative into Ukrainian informational space and create panic about a new long-range system. So we don't really know. What we have seen is over the past nights, there has been multiple Iskanders and multiple other long-range missile systems fired into Ukraine with a lot of strikes. What I'm looking for in this is I'm looking for any Iskanders that have gone into Ukraine or from launch sites more than about 400 kilometers. So with this, time will tell us if this weapon is going to be mass-produced or if it is not. Is it propaganda? Is it not? I think the propaganda value in this is actually limited. We know Russia has many different sort of long-range systems. I don't really see why this specific propaganda. I don't know. But again, we will see. I'm looking over the maps and looking for when we see Iskander M's going over that 400 kilometers. And if it is en masse, then we'll get an idea that the serial production and employment of this system has begun. This is quoting the other article saying one key component is autonomous inertial navigation system, which provides high accuracy using built-in sensors to track the missile's position and orientation in flight. So using, well, it says GPS, but it will be GLONASS, it's Russia's version of that, as well as other systems on board and counters as well to increase its accuracy and also survivability against offences. So again, we will see, but we have seen a number of Iskander strikes overnight and in the past days as well. So let's quickly look at the elections and then we'll go over the maps. Now, this is from Reuters here. Title: US wants Ukraine to hold elections following a ceasefire. Of course, this is from Mr. Kellogg, Trump's envoy to Ukraine. Ukraine is to hold elections potentially by the end of the year, especially if Kyiv can agree to a truce with Russia in the coming months. He said in an interview with presidential and parliamentary elections, saying that this needs to be done. And if you want to harp on about democracy again and again, well, democracy needs to actually be introduced as well. Now, I see a lot of comments under this, and this has been going on now for 3 years, around well, if you read the Constitution, it's against the law. Ukraine can't hold elections. It's illegal, X, Y, Z, all of this. No, that's incorrect. And I'll actually break down what this is. And we've done this before, but it's important to actually look at what is it actually, and then we'll talk over the challenges and why it is not. This is why our videos are 40 minutes. We want to add some nuance to things. So, can Ukraine hold elections? Yes, they can. Under Article 19 of the law of Ukraine on the legal regime of martial law, certain rights and freedoms can be temporarily restricted during martial law, including the right to hold elections. Specifically, the law allows for the suspension of elections and referenda during martial law, as it may be deemed impractical or unsafe to conduct them. But it provides the legal framework to not hold elections or temporarily restrict. But it's that legal framework to do it. It doesn't mean it's then illegal to do it. So yes, Ukraine can legally hold elections. It's not illegal to do, like many say. But of course, this comes with challenges. Mr. Kellogg has said most democratic nations have elections in their time of war. Look over the Second World War, from the UK to the US, and many other countries held elections. I think it's good for democracy. That's the beauty of a solid democracy. You have more than one person potentially running, but we have seen restrictions on opposing sides and opposing media as well. But of course, there are issues and challenges that come with this that Zelensky's government will then look towards as well. And these are real challenges. That there is a large percentage of the population that is in occupied territory. Russia see it as theirs. Ukraine see it as theirs. How do these people vote? Are they going to get a say in how this is? So that is a huge problem. That is what Ukraine's looking at. They're going, well, we have thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people outside of the country, either in occupied territories or have moved outside of Ukraine. They're in Poland, they're in Australia, they're in America, they're in Germany. How do we get these people to vote? Is it just going to be the people remaining in the country? So that is a very large challenge to make sure everyone actually has their say on the future. So I guess there are always workarounds in this, but it is a challenge. Another challenge here, which may be a lot less spoken about, is the potential for a less EU-friendly country's government to come in. I'm not saying someone who's the enemy of the EU, but someone who wants to remain that sovereignty and independence outside of the European Union as well. We know Zelensky is all in. All his chips are in on NATO and the EU and upholding X, Y, and Z goals and resources and world order and all of that. But what if someone comes in, if Zelensky gets voted out, which would be highly likely, who is, not on the same trajectory that, it has been on so far? And that's always a challenge. In a democracy, it's democracy. It goes which way and you have to accept it even if you do not like it. Of course, people in the US are coming to terms with this, and Romania at the moment, I don't think they're coming to terms with it. I think they are closing their eyes and wishing for the best. But again, there are challenges in this and ability to work with that forward. Of course, many in the West have relationships with Zelensky and want to keep that and not put it up to chance of someone else coming in. Who would be most likely and best to come in? I think it's probably Valery Zaluzhny. If he were to run, of course, Chief of the Armed Forces at one point, now Ambassador to the UK, I believe he is incredibly popular, a military man. He sort of got booted out and the rug pulled from underneath him. But looking back, he was correct on a lot of very tough decisions, and especially one that probably pushed him out the door with wanting to mobilise 500,000 back last year. Oh, no, sorry. Incorrect, not last year, 2023, which we know now was definitely the correct decision. So let's have a look at the maps. And of course, we have a lot to go over here. So in the center of your screen, you will see Ukraine, of course, the capital of Kyiv. Red areas occupied since 22, purple since 2014. Now, the first place I want to come is up into Kursk. Of course, this is Sumy in Ukraine, Kursk in Russia, where Ukraine has pushed across. Somewhere from day one, I've said I do not understand and doesn't stand up to what we know about attritional protracted war, especially if you are numerically inferior for soldiers and resources as well. So let's look at this. Firstly, I will show you the map. Now, nothing groundbreaking in this. If you watch my maps and have a look, this is showing similar to the grey zone on here, but it is showing very similar to what AMK mapping showed us, if not a little bit less. The AMK showed on the northern side of Guevo that the Russian forces were knocking on the front doors of the outsides of these houses here. So wait out on any confirmation of movement here. But I talk about that this is very difficult and that the soldiers in here who were some of Ukraine's best and some of the weapon systems in here, the Abrams, the Challengers, I probably shouldn't say Challengers, Leopards at least, and Bradleys, there's been a hell of a lot of that equipment put into here that definitely could have been used in other areas, and this is why we say we don't really make sense. And I've said that this has jeopardised, in my opinion, a lot of places down in the east and the south. We hear about manpower shortages and limited amount of men down around Velyka Novosilka, Pokrovsk. Well, where is there some fantastic weapons and a hell of a lot of people up in this, I will say, at this point in time, not strategically important area? The propaganda informational benefit of this in the initial weeks was massive. Should have been an in and out operation. It would have kept all those benefits without now this grinding attritional phase and the inability to supply logistics in and out really efficiently or effectively, which we see with even medivacs in here being very, very difficult. And this is something I wanted to show you of a couple of geolocations. So I've got a geolocation on the western side, right on top of this road, where we see these then three tree lines coming out, and we see 9.1 kilometers behind the border into Sumy Oblast, an FPV drone striking some Ukrainian vehicles, and then at Miropolye, right about, I've gone as close as I can on these arrows, then claimed FAB 1500 glide bombs. And what I'm showing you is, of course, these are the roads. These is what feed into areas like Suja, up into Guevo. These are critical areas that are getting hit very, very hard and have a lot of ISR capability over them. So we see this is in Sumy on that eastern side. Of course, then we see this FAB landing. Now, in my opinion, I don't think this is a FAB 1500. I actually think it's a FAB 500, but I am happy to be incorrect on that. It just doesn't seem big enough for the claimed 1500, but we can see the impact in this area. And then this, the western side road that I showed you, we can see where they are showing us on this then computer screen, and multiple strikes here. Sorry, I'm skipping through the video poorly. Against then fleet green, or I'd call them green fleet, but that's probably the wrong word, vehicles for the Ukrainian military. So strikes here, as well as going around some of where the barricades are, and you can see the amount of use of these drones in these areas too, of course, making any movements, logistics, in, out, whatever, very difficult in this area. Now, I think if there was a smooth way for Ukraine to get the resources and men out of here and redeploy them, I think at this point in time they would do it. But the biggest challenge in here is, one, pulling them out. Secondly, Russia has amassed a lot of forces in here. What's stopping them pushing across now into Sumy? This operation into Kursk Oblast will either be the largest tactical mistake of this war, or the largest four-dimensional chess tactical amazing bloody command that we see. At this point, I am with the former. Now, let's come down into the map and have a look and see where things are changing. So we'll come into Velyka Novosilka. We have a large breakdown of Pokrovsk. Now, similar to other maps, what he is showing, what Suryak is showing, is that up to the Nokryali, right in here, has come under Russian control. But we need to have a look at this a little bit closer, because what he's showing is all the way to the north of then Novaya Komar, right down using the Nokryali as a border. Now, I would not be surprised to see this at all. It gives Russia the benefit of having, somewhere to push up to, and Ukraine something that they are behind, so a physical barrier. So Suryak is showing more something like down the Nokryali. Whoa, here we go. Something like this in here is being occupied. That is more in line, I guess, with what he is showing. Pretty bloody close. That would not surprise me at all. That would make sense to move up until you hit a waterway, a mountain range, something like this. That makes a lot of sense. Now, the island boys have then become the bloody bay boys out in here. So we see Andriivka, an expansion of control. Now, it doesn't really make sense on what is red check in here because it's showing all of this as red check, but this was red yesterday. It doesn't matter, just a mapping thing. Most likely, I believe this is connected through here when we're talking on the Kursk and Andriivka front. But this is a very, very important area. So let's have a look at this, and then we'll talk about Pokrovsk more in depth. We have a couple of Syriac maps in here. So he's showing back on day 1068, movement out across this road, which we had seen. Of course, one map showed the teleportation of Russians, other showed fighting through on this area. But you can also see on this map, sorry, I'll zoom down a little bit on this one, further movement. This is Zelenivkia, this red dot, in between Konstantinopel and Ulaki. Remember, we had a lot of reports, but we couldn't confirm it of any geolocations, that the Russians were knocking on the doors of Konstantinopel and Ulaki. Not physically, but they're moving in that direction, closing up this envelopment, right? And then we have day 1071, showing movement through Dashne. Of course, we showed you where the geo confirmations were for that. We can confirm that occurred. We also know multiple maps showed down in, well, this was at one point the Uzpenivkia front pocket in here. So you know what I'm speaking about at the moment. There's no town in here to really go off, but also showing to the west of Zelenivkia, where this grey zone is here. That right in the direction of Konstantinopel, getting very, very close to here, the Russian forces have advanced. Of course, then deepening this pocket and then squeezing it at the same time, and southerly pushes, as this map shows as well, down into Andriivka. But of course, this is showing this is just connected through here. What I believe we'll see is up to the Vovcha, similar to Velyka Novosilka, we'll see the Vovcha become like a natural border. So we see these maps. Syriac's map is lining up with more of the other maps that I am seeing. So let's move our way up into Pokrovsk. We see advancement out of Kotliny. Very importantly, this will become relevant in a second, 4.5 kilometers to the train line and the road in here. These are very, very critical, connecting Dnipro with Pokrovsk, and this gateway from Dnipro into then the Donetsk Oblast, through Dnipro Oblast into areas Kramatorsk, Slovyansk, and Toretsk, of all areas we will speak about in a sec. So those advancements are very, very important tactically and strategically in this war that we are seeing. So let's have a bit of a look and see where things are shifting here. So movement, Kotliny, look, somewhat different, somewhat the same. Let's confirm there was definitely some movement in Russia's favour on that sector. To just the south of Uzpenivkia, we can see some ground being made. Remember, this actually does line up with the DivGen and a couple of other maps that we have shown you. Now we're going to go right between Kursk and Pokrovsk front at this point in time before we do a bit of a deep dive. We see Sebrini, more ground being made in this direction and occupying some remaining areas in here, and further pushing, this map freezes a bit, further pushing towards this road that connects Yasnove and Andriivka. We can see where this is pushing up in here. Remember, we've seen Deep State show these maps, AMK and DivGen too. So we've definitely know there's been a lot of movement in these sectors. But then we come to his most recent map of this, and we can confirm this sort of push out that is happening here. This red dot is Slovyanka, has now cut off this road, as well as further pushes, and I believe, no, not occupying completely, but this area in here, this Nadez, something we've been talking about off the DivGen maps, claim of that coming under complete Russian occupation also. Now, before we zoom in on this, we have one more update. We see Deep State map Baranivkia front, of course, towards this very, very important intersection here, showing some red check that the Russians have moved forward on this. Now, we can see Baranivkia, look, same general area. This paddock where my cursor is this paddock right here. So showing up to the grey zone somewhat in here, but we can confirm definite movement on there. Why is that important? We'll zoom out and we see this is creating the eastern flank of Pokrovsk at Minograd, but the western flank of Toretsk, and potential to cut off one of the logistics routes coming from Konstantinivka, Kramatorsk into Pokrovsk, coming from east to west to east. Russians have moved 4.5 kilometers up to where the train line and road lines are coming in. That is squeezing down. Envelop areas and squeeze it. It's better to bypass things than to go head on into it. So this article came out from The Independent. Battle for Pokrovsk, the deserted Ukrainian city that could be the most important of the war. Now, that in here is actually in the title. They've made a typo. Okay? Let's have a look at some of this. Now, before this, in some of the paragraphs that we have cut off, this officer said the enemy had much greater numbers of infantry, attacked in small groups, willing to take extremely high casualties, and adeptly exploited the landscape and low visibility weather conditions to hide themselves from drones. The Phoenix, who's going by his call sign, has said day and night they were moving forwards. Pokrovsk road and rail connections have made it an important supply centre for large section of Ukraine's front line, although in recent months the threat of Russian artillery and drones has limited that function. So we've got a few areas we're pointing out on this. This is the road we're speaking about. This is the road here that has been cut off. Of course, Pokrovsk. This is the one through to Bakhmut, going, of course, down into areas like Toretsk, Kursk, Velyka Novosilka. Show you quickly on the map here. This fellow at this then think tank has said Pokrovsk's transit routes mean that if it fell, Russian forces could use it as a staging ground to push north or west. It sets up Russian forces for a potential advance into Dnipro region, further behind the front lines. They're building and repairing rail lines. So they're repairing rail lines. We know Russia and the Soviets, from Soviet times, they rely heavily on rail lines. Rail lines can be easily damaged, but also very easily repaired. And there's a lot of rail in around these sectors. Of course, we see the one cut off and the other one in here. They can then move up their own logistics, and that enables them to push further west. So if they can get Pokrovsk, they can then push all that rail into here too, staging point, and push further north or west. It is not one of the 4 Ukrainian regions claimed by Russia. Of course, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zap, Kherson, Crimea. Well, it's 5, but the 4 that are post-2022. Moscow's occupation of a part of this region could strengthen its hand in future negotiations. Now, what I have been saying is we've seen Russia moving through Dashny. I am saying I think it's critical for Ukraine not to let Russia occupy an inch of Dnipro Oblast, although that is unlikely at this point in time with the movements we're seeing. So why does Russia want Pokrovsk? Well, it's a stepping stone to incorporating the entire region into Russia. It's one of the major areas in here, and Russian media, they call it the gateway to Donetsk. This would allow Moscow to severely disrupt Ukrainian supply lines along the eastern front and boost its campaign to capture Chasiv Yar, where the high ground is. Squeezing the Ukrainian military's access to the road network and the rail network would make it harder for Kyiv's troops to hold pockets of territory either side of Pokrovsk. Now, I'll show you a couple of maps in a second. But Viktor Trebov, Ukrainian military spokesman for the Kotsia group, he said the Russians were trying to bypass and surround Pokrovsk from the west. Okay, this Viktor Trebov is the same guy that said recently that Velyka Novosilka was not at threat of encirclement and that withdrawal was, going to be able to occur. Okay then, grain of salt, large. He said this differed from their approach to taking previous big urban areas where they opted for costly frontal assaults and street fighting. It seems that perhaps for the first time they have started to spare their manpower. This is objectively fucking wrong. And this is some of the problem with the incompetence that we're seeing in some of these positions. This is just wrong. Look at any large urban centre that has fallen in the last 12, 18 months. The costly frontal assaults and street fighting, that is not what is happening. Look at Ugledar, look at Velyka Novosilka, look at Kurkov, look at what is developing in Pokrovsk, look at Avdiivka, look at Osheretny, look at any of these areas. We say again and again and again, and it's a meme at this type for Ukrainian command liking pockets. They take the flanks, they envelop, and then it collapses with a withdrawal. if you're thinking that this is the first time that they are doing this, there's no fucking hope. No wonder the desertions are in the absolute thousands. It fucking infuriates me. 3 analysts that Reuters spoke to said that should Russia capture the city, has 2 main options for advancing on the Pokrovsk axis of battle. The first was to push westward into the sparsely populated plains of Dnipro region, which are lightly fortified and offer few natural or urban obstacles for Kyiv to use in defence. Remember, you want natural, then creeks, high ground, low ground, cities, or anything to use for your defence. The second was to push north into a denser patchwork of industrial towns that would be tougher to get through, that would enable Moscow to put pressure on Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, the remaining large areas in Donetsk. Okay, so let's show you a couple of maps. Now, this map I use, the fortifications, is John Helen, JJ Helen on Twitter, X, whatever it's called. So let's look at if they made a westerly push. So this is Udashny Pokrovsk. Let's imagine that the Russians have this. So this is the border between Donetsk and Dnipro. 4.5 kilometers or 5 kilometers to this border at this point in time. They push into here. You can see by the dark blue and the blue, they're very correct. It's very, very sparse on the fortifications and then the towns here and urban centres for Russia to be able to make a lot of ground very quickly in then Dnipro Oblast. This causes a lot of issues. Where I'm talking about, we're looking at Dashny, Mezhova, we're talking in this direction, especially if they can gain the train lines in here and they're able to push a lot of equipment into here, use this as a staging ground to be able to push out towards the west, in the direction at least of Zaporizhia and Dnipro, getting in behind a lot of the fortifications then to the south of this location. Okay, let's zoom out and see if then northwards happen. So this is Pokrovsk. We're imagining that this has come under control. The Russians have some control here as well. This is that train line we are speaking about. This is Chasiv Yar. This is where the high ground is. We see this road coming out here. This is Toretsk, New York front. Of course, this is the road connecting. That causes a lot of issues for the logistics supply in here, but a lot of benefits for Russia if they can gain this road for logistics back into Pokrovsk, heading from where if it gets crossed around the Baranivkia area. And of course, if there's a northern assault, yes, there's more towns, more ability to have fortifications, but it's in the direction of these major areas, Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, but also what will be helping this northwards push is the high ground in Chasiv Yar for artillery, mortars, electronic equipment, radio signals, all of this. So Pokrovsk is very, very important. Do not underestimate how important some of these areas are, and that 1 square inch is more important than a square kilometre in other sectors. So let's have a look then down in Toretsk. No changes shown on this map. Remember, a lot of maps are showing that Toretsk has come basically all under occupation. Situation to its front, Russian army took control of a series of fortifications at the western outskirts of Toretsk city. So western outskirts, right, you see where this road heads up, right through here, and he's showing that Toretsk has effectively come under Russian control. All but these high point spoils, which will be very important also. Let's continue moving our way up, and we'll get to, of course, Bakhmut, Chasiv Yar, area spoke of, high ground, Konstantinivka, Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, very important sector in here. We know this can be very fluid, even day to day on the urban fighting in here, showing, as per all the other maps now, that this tree forest area has come under then Russian occupation. Further map here. Then we need to come down. We need to line up what was at one point the road of life and moving down off then this road. So it's a little bit hard to see because the maps can be so different on this, but moving out into these sectors in here, which we know this is effectively where that geolocation was the other day. I showed you right on my cursor is that there's definitely grey zone there. If there's enemy soldiers there, it is at least grey zone. So let's move up, and we're looking for Raihodkia. We can find it right in here. We have this Novohorivkia. Now, other maps we've shown you showed further advancement in here. Suryak, this is no different today. He's saying full control over this town sitting in here. moving out. We can see where this like square paddock is, where my cursor is, that it's in right up to this direction. That's where he's showing this advancement. Let's move into the northeast. Now I'm expecting a few more updates on this. We spoke at length about this yesterday. If you'd like to see this, Deep State showed a update in here yesterday as well. He's showing Russian army took full control over Dorichnia. Remember, we reported that off DivGen while Suryk had a couple of days off, so he is now confirming that as well. Wait out for a Ukrainian map to confirm this, but we know there was definitely advancement in this front. And then movement out to the north, of course, of Dorichnia, and further down to the south, and Zapadne as well, and these areas. What Suryk isn't showing is the amount of other bridgehead around this Novomilyansk that Deep State map has shown, but I will confirm that because it is a Russian advancement shown on a Ukrainian map. Same as if a Ukrainian advancement shown on a Russian map, it's more likely, because of the incentive, to probably be correct. Deep State even spoke about this yesterday. Now, I wanted to go back over these resources, of course, some questions to the AI bloody deep seek, almost said deep state, that now, the Chinese know everything about me. But I did miss, because I missed Crimea yesterday. So if Russia would occupy Donetsk, Luhansk, Zap, and Kherson regions, what is the estimate of the amount of dollar value in natural resources, including as many resources as possible, such as titanium and uranium, be as accurate and objective as possible? So I've also asked in here, including Crimea. Okay, so coal, we're at $7.5 trillion. Gas, $6.5 trillion, or 3.9 to 6.5 trillion. Iron ore, 2.5 trillion. We went over this, but the manganese, 2.3 to 3.4. Titanium, 100 to 150 billion, but it's critical for aerospace and defense, and Ukraine supplied 10% of global titanium pre-war. So just monetary value and strategic value can be very different. Titanium is one of these. If you want to look into that, look at how America built the SR-71 from Soviet titanium. Lithium, we speak about this, that Russia does have, undeveloped lithium mining at the moment, but Ukraine has Europe's largest deposits of lithium. What is lithium in? Well, everything from the computer you're watching this on, to the phone you're watching this on, to your Tesla or your BYD. Now, of course, China would love to get their paws on some of this. Uranium, of course, going to become more and more relevant into the future. There's no major uranium deposits in Donetsk, Luhansk, Zap, or Kherson, but Ukraine does have a lot of this in Dnipro, which is not occupied. Rare earth materials, somewhere 300 million to $1 billion as well. Rare earth elements, they can have strategic value as well. Now, agricultural land, this is one that it's not just the annual output, it's the strain it can put on other areas, but this is in the billions of dollars. Other resources, graphite also used in a lot of other things around renewables as well, I believe, down to salt, clay, all this Zap, 500 million, billion, 50 billion. We're talking a lot of bloody money. Total estimated resource value, now that we've included other ones to be a bit more objective and look not just on gas, oil, bloody coal, we're looking somewhere in everything around 12 to 21 trillion dollars. But also the control that comes with this too. But it's not what Russia would be gaining if they take that. It is what Ukraine and the West would be losing also. Now, of course, I know these areas are not completely occupied, but if I can come up with a way to ask that question, but of course this won't go up to date on maps, I will. But we're just taking it as a thought process at the moment. But there are some key caveats to this. Of course, it's not free to pull this out of the ground. There are extraction costs. This is very, very expensive. Russia is under sanctions. This may be lifted due to ceasefire deals, negotiations. Infrastructure, of course, a lot of this is being in war. Ukraine, say the mine just outside of Pokrovsk, has been collapsed as well. So the infrastructure's not there to have to be rebuilt or then fixed. Legal claims as well, and who would buy this. So look, China's not going to give a shit about the sanctions or legal claims. But conclusion, the occupied regions hold 12 to 21 trillion in natural resources at current market prices. But Russia's net benefit would likely be 10 to 20% of this figure due to sanctions and some of the other challenges that come around this. So I asked it and went down a little bit more about, given the resource, but also the challenges, caveats, and sanctions, given Russia's current technology, how much profit could they make on this? And it's broken it down here to net profit of 2 to 3.5 billion per year. Because of course you can't pull everything out at once. And of course you've got very large upfront costs. So it could be at a loss for a few years, but long-term profit post 25 could be $5 to $10 billion a year. But the strategic values of things like titanium and manganese are more critical for Russia's defense industry than defense profit, but also limiting that on other sectors. And of course, where China will want their pause on some of this. Conclusion, Russia's net profit from occupied Ukraine resources is likely minimal or negative in the short term. Getting in is very expensive. People make money on housing, but at the beginning, you're not making any money with all the taxes. With long-term gains capped at 5 to 10 billion a year under optimal conditions, but saying these sanctions are going to hang around too. Resource strategic value outweighs the direct economic benefits. So then I've asked as well, how about without sanctions if these are to be lifted? And we can see a huge increase on this, going from your, 2 to 3.5 billion a year to 26 to almost $50 billion. Of course, control of Crimea's gas reserves and strengthen Russia's grip on energy markets can also inflate, of course, those prices as deflate them as well by flooding markets with things like this. Critical minerals, of course, we've spoken about titanium and manganese. Food security occupied regions produce 15% of Ukraine's pre-war grain, but of course that food export and the amount of pool you can get with this, long-term projections over 10 to 20 years, the high value then reserves and depletion of these and how they could diminish, advancements in technology, being able to get to things like lithium as well, but also as synthetics come out, could this reduce demand for them? And political shifts, a future Ukrainian reconquest or regime change in Russia could upend control. Of course, Ukraine want to return these diplomatically, but wherever the border ends in the war, I think they're going to want America is going to want that as the permanent of where it is. So the conclusion, without sanctions, again, optimal, Russia could generate $26 to $49 billion a year. But remember, this is twofold. That, again, we don't know if not all of this is occupied. We don't know where the border is going to sit, but it's also a loss of that value for the West, including Ukraine, and a gain for Russia. So there's a lot of other interest in here, from everyone from BlackRock to Vanguard to the governments to rebuild costs, as well as the ability for Putin, for the Kremlin, to buffer the loss of the $300 billion that is in frozen assets. The $500 billion over a decade will represent 2 to 4% boost in Russia's GDP. So again, this is a very, very important aspect for the ability to rebuild Ukraine, for the ability for Russia's post-war attrition for their economy, all of this, and the foreign investment as well. So again, we will see. We'll look at sanctions and everything around that as the days come. Legends, you have a fantastic day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.